Okay, I am going to go ahead and get started. Can you all hear me? Okay, thanks, Johnny. So thank you all for joining us. Welcome. This is the Generate version 11.3 office hours. My name is Liz Brunette. For those of you who don't know me, I am the product owner of Generate. Thank you. Okay, so today, in the next hour, we will be reviewing changes made in Generate in version 11.3. We'll be doing a quick preview of 12.0, which is slated to come out in May. We'll also be looking at our release calendar, and then opening it up to you all for discussion, questions, comments, concerns, anything like that. Additionally, we will be reviewing and providing our feedback survey link. So it's really important we use that information to kind of, figure out the best process for doing these sessions, incorporating your feedback as best as possible, all of those different things. So again, I think it only takes 2 or 3 minutes to complete it. If you all have the time to do so, it's really helpful for us. One additional thing I wanted to call out, kind of coming out of that survey information, is we have heard from you all that you like having these office hours prior to our release. So as you all know, this release is, or this office hours is maybe a week or so after our 11.3 release. We did that to try and incorporate, knowing, the time was not great with file submission due dates. So really just trying to incorporate that and making sure that we accounted for it in your guys' daily busy lives. Johnny, I am going to pass it over to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Johnny Cunningham. For those of you who either haven't attended one of these or if you're lucky enough not to be one of my states, I am an ETL implementer or developer implementation specialist, 20 different titles. Some of them have an expletive in front of them when somebody says them. I work with states on getting Generate installed and actually working on migrations and ETLs and validating data and all of that work. So I will be able to talk you through our 11.3 release today and hopefully answer any of your questions. Oh, so as we get into this really quickly, if you do have a question, we have an open discussion section at the end. If you have a question during the presentation, please don't hesitate to ask it. You can either use the raise hand option or just put it in the chat. So a couple of people are monitoring the chat and stuff. So by all means, just interrupt me as we're going if you have a question or if there's something I need to explain or anything that you need as we go through this. And if you haven't been to an office hours before, there's sort of the same flow. But at any point, like I said, if you have a question or if there's something I can help you with, let me know. So the first thing we're going to cover are the changes in this release for IDEA specific files. So the next set coming up is directory and several of the organization files. But for 29 specifically, we had an issue where our staging environment address variables were not defined with the same length that they were in the RDS tables, and that was causing a problem if you had a very long address that came into the staging environment, because I think they were 10 characters longer, right? So it would cause a problem where it would actually truncate the data inappropriately. So that's the first bullet there. We updated the address, all of the column lengths across. So as the data flows through, it's going to flow through cleanly. The second one was the LEA charter status. And for those of you that do directory, if you're familiar with that, it's basically two different values depending on whether or not your state has charters, right? So if you have charters in your state and that specific district is not a charter, then it gets reported as the second value there, NOTCHR, not charter. If your state doesn't have charter districts at all, then they get reported as NA. So that's the logic that we had in the background. And we realized in working with one of our states, and this is why we really appreciate the collaboration with you guys, in working with one of our states, we realized our logic wasn't complete. It was doing part of there's 2 or 3 criteria that go into that, but it was doing part of it, but not all of it. So we modified that logic to work. And I think, Ryan, I think I see your hand up. I don't know if we can, so I don't know, Travis, can we unmute or does he need to put it in chat? How do we?
He's unmuted. Yeah. He can open his mic.
Okay. Can you try it again, Brian?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So the question I have real quick, Wyoming will have 2 new LEA charters this year for 23-24. We have not had LEA charters in the past. We've had charter schools, but they were just attached to one of our regular public school districts. This year, we're going to have 2 actual charter LEAs. Does this mean that now all of my other LEAs will have to be marked as not char instead of NA? Is that what I'm hearing? So, right, previously all of my LEAs were NA because we didn't have any. Now that we're going to have
right.
2, all the remaining have to be not CHR rather than NA. Is that what I'm hearing?
That is correct, but you won't have to do anything. Generate's going to do that.
Okay.
So you won't have to do anything, but you will, like when you go to do your matching at the end, Generate's going to produce not charter. So just be aware of that. Like if you're comparing it to the previous year, just for compatibility's sake, things like that. So you're going to be comparing not charter to NA.
Okay.
But yes, Generate is going to produce not charter. There's nothing you have to do in that case.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. And by the way, I got to shout out to them. Brian is the one that helped us resolve that when we were working with them. So, and then the last one there, the last bullet for directory is we noticed there was a problem with the way the dates were being handled. If when you loaded your data into staging, there were current school year organizations, but then there were also future dated organizations, right? So both of those loaded at the same time. The date handling wasn't handling those 2 appropriately. So that's resolved now as well. And then child count, we found an issue with the way the 0 counts were being produced at the LEA and school levels. So that's resolved. That's obviously not in this, not in this next set of files, but in July, but we resolved that. Assessments, we worked with 3 states on assessments, and we had the new assessments this year with all of the changes. So we really appreciate, the opportunity to work with those 3 states, and they were able to submit assessments. But in our work with them, we realized there were a couple of code issues we found after 11.2 had already been released. So we made those changes for them so they were able to produce assessments. And then we got those changes into 11.3. So they are now part of the code base. They will be part of assessments going forward for anybody who obviously is going to work on assessments. Discipline is a similar thing because obviously discipline's already passed. But we found a problem where there's a toggle question where you have to answer the age groups for students with developmental delay, right? You pick the ages that's appropriate in your state. If no selection was made, the 0 count logic was inappropriately handling that, right? It was basically saying, well, you've selected everything. So it was trying to create 0 counts for everything. And then we resolved that if we have a state that has not answered that toggle question, it will appropriately create the 0 counts for discipline now. And then for staff, It was basically just updating the permitted values. They changed the age group talk changed to match the way child count. So instead of having 3 to 5, it's now, what is it? Age 3, not K. I forgot the exact thing, but basically the staff permitted values for age group taught changed to match the way child count uses it. And that's it for the IDEA files. So for non-IDEA reports, we just had 2 that had changes specifically. One of them was the metadata for 116. This is more of an internal thing, but we did want to list it. So we typically, we pulled all of the metadata that's available as Ed provides it. We pull all of that data down. And as we pulled it down, 116 wasn't in it. And we had a state that was actually working on 116. That's how we discovered 116 wasn't included. So we had to manually go get that data, pull it down, put it into Generate. That's the change for 116. And then for 45, again, we had a state working on 45. That's how we came across this one. In the dynamic SQL, there's some logic that actually goes through and defines the dimension tables and the primary keys in those tables. And then it uses that in the dynamic logic. And the dimension for immigration wasn't correctly defined. So then further downstream, there was a problem with producing some of the immigrant numbers. So that was the fix there, is correcting that definition of the table and the primary key. That's it for the non-IDEA files. Okay. So user interface changes. This time we actually have some. A lot of times we don't for this, for some of the smaller releases, but this time, so I'm going to give you a little context on the background for this one. We are working on getting Generate into the open source community, right? So we want to put all of that Generate code out there, just like CEDS is out there. And in the UI, obviously we use code libraries and things. One of the code libraries, the third-party libraries that we use is called Wijmo. They don't have an open source option. So we're having to replace the Wijmo components with an alternative. And we started doing that work. There's quite a bit in the front end, there's quite a bit that we used Wijmo for. So we started with the reports, and you'll see this as you start to work through some of these things. So the first set of reports, the controls, I don't want to get too deep into the web code for those of you that don't do that stuff, but in the controls, there was one control for Wijmo that handled about 80% of the reports that display on screen. So we worked on that one first because it had the biggest impact. So the way the report is going to display looks a little different. If you've been, if you're one of those people that is really attuned to those things, you may log in, look at, like child count, for instance, I think is the one we have on screen. I'm going to show it to you in a second as well. But you may notice that it looks slightly different than you remember, and that's because it's using the new control. And I'm going to demo this for you real quick. So I'm going to swipe the share, hopefully. Let me get the meeting to come back up over here so I don't lose you. Can everybody see my screen, or can anybody see my screen, I hope? Okay. So this is basically the screenshot that was just there, but I wanted to show you. So this is the new look. It's not that much different than what you had seen before, what you were used to. The organization of the header and the presentation of the categories is slightly different. So as far as that goes, it's not really that much different. But by putting this new one in, we actually were able to leverage a pretty cool new feature, and it's this search here. So, and I apologize now because I'm looking at my screen that has it, so I'm not looking at you guys. I apologize, but so this search option over here in the corner, or just above the presentation of the data. So it's basically filtering to allow you to better use the data that's in the UI. So when you click search, it actually opens up all of the filters. So anything that is displayed in this block, so depending on the report, is the things you're going to have, that you're going to have to use. So let's say you wanted to filter on only your female students. You can do that, and now you only see your female counts. And I'm doing this at the SEA level because it's just simpler, but you can do this at any level. You can filter by schools and districts and whatever it is you might need. You can also filter by multiple categories, so you could do that as well. And then you would get only your female students with autism. So you can use these filters in any way you want. The one limitation we have right now, and we're working on this, is that it is case sensitive and text specific. I'm not sure if that's the right way to say it, but really quick. So you can reset the filters if you want, and it immediately produces the full report again. You can turn it off if you don't want to use up all of that real estate when it opens up the search boxes. It's easy to turn on and off and reset the filter. But what I mean is, like for autism, if you do that, right, because I did not capitalize the A, it does not match the header row, so then it produces no results because there is nothing for it to filter. So I just want to make sure you're aware that we are working on that. So we're looking at a couple of different options to clean up the filtering and the search there. But I did want to show you that because I think it is pretty useful. And I'm thinking probably for those of you that have been doing this for a while, you can probably already think of multiple ways to use this. But if you're new to Generate, a lot of times what happens is you'll migrate data and then you're matching, and you may have a variance in a specific category, right? Like one category has a problem or one specific set of data, something like that. So this is an easy way, like as you go back and you modify your ETL, you make whatever changes you need to make and you remigrate that data. If you want to just look and see the impact of your new migration, then you can just open up the filtering, look at that specific data. You know, if you're looking at a specific school that wasn't showing up appropriately, you could load the school level file, use the filter to look at that school specifically. So it's there for you to use. I just wanted to show you that. So Travis, if you can take the share back.
Oh, Johnny, we had a couple of chats come in.
Sure.
As you leave the screen, Angie says she likes the filtering. I think you're pretty excited about it. So that's awesome. And June wondered if you could just type in AUT, will it pull the right information?
I don't think it, right now you have to type in exactly the text that is the header, and that's what we're working on trying to clean up. And I apologize, I was going to show that because there's a column, and I think it's in the screenshot there. The second one is deaf blindness, right? If you look at the header for the disability category, and it's a capital D with a dash between them and a lowercase b. If you don't enter it exactly like that, it won't find it. And you do have to enter the full name currently. Like I said, for version 12, we are looking at ways to refine that filtering to give you like things like that, right? Smart search, potentially maybe giving drop downs with the appropriate options that you can select from. We're looking at several different things. It all depends on that control in the web code, like what kind of searching it offers, how can we modify it? You turn web developers loose on stuff like that, and it's like being in the playground. So, but for version 12, it should be cleaner, but it is usable now, and it gives you all of that filtering. You just have to remember to make it case specific and text specific. So, June, I hope that answers the question. And then the last one, or the second one there, which is the last one. When you're running a migration, if you are familiar with this, so if you're new to Generate, so when you're running a migration on screen in the UI, you select the migration that you want to run, and then underneath it, we have a block that actually shows you the log file as the log is actively being hit by the migration process. So the log writes out, the migration process writes out to the log which step it's on, which thing it's processing. So you can actually see that actively happening. So you can follow along and see what's happening in a migration. And then obviously if there is an error, it will produce the error there, so you can see that as well. But we just cleaned that up because the spacing of the columns, there's a date column and then there's a description column that had the actual text. The date column just was using up a little too much space, so it didn't give as much room for the text. We just sort of cleaned that up. So now it maximizes the amount of space for the text, so you can see those log entries live as you're migrating data. That's all the second one is. That's it for the UI. Okay, so then general changes. We've got a few, but we broke them into two. So this first one, and I'm setting myself up over here because I'm going to swipe the share again. We created a new utility called the Staging Table Snapshot Utility. And basically what this is going to do is as you migrate data into staging, you can elect to run this tool and it will create a copy of the staging tables and set them aside, right? And I'm going to show you this in just a second. But it basically sets them aside so you have an exact copy of the data as it existed when you loaded that specific set of data. It is file specification specific. I always have to be careful when I say those two together. So it is file specific. So you would put in basically like, and I'm going to demo this in just a second, you would put in child count and it will copy the tables for child count. So it won't copy every staging table. It will copy only the ones that are required for child count. You'll have a copy of those. And I'm going to show you that in just a second. So on the left, though, I do want to say, if you are familiar with our Generate documentation, it shows you there how you can navigate to it. If you're not, we're going to have a slide for that in a minute. I would suggest going out to the documentation, just looking around in there. There's lots of stuff we've put in there already. We're constantly working on trying to clean that up and refine it and get more data in there. But we have and this is a plug for the development team, we have the Generate Utilities page in the Generate documentation. And it's all of the things that we've developed that you might be able to leverage for different things depending on what you're working on. So I would say go out and take a look at the utilities page. There's documentation on each one that'll show you how to use them. So, okay. Personal plug done. I'm going to go back and share. So one more time, can everybody see the screen, or at least can somebody see the screen?
Yeah, we see your SQL screen.
Okay. Is it possible to zoom in just a bit or no?
Yeah. Is that better?
That's better. And if participants are also able to actually use the toggle at the bottom of their screen to plus and minus in and out. Thank you, Johnny.
Sure. And I saw, I think it was Brian had his hand up. Was that from before, or did you have another question? Thought I saw.
No, Johnny, I took my hand down. I don't have a question, but thank you.
Okay. I am not great at multitasking. I just happened to see the little yellow hand and I was like, I don't want to miss somebody. Okay. So basically I described what's going to happen. It's very simple to do. So I'm in my test environment. Oh, so let me be clear up front because I'm going to copy some student data. What you're about to see is entirely manufactured student data. These are not actual students. This is test data we create on our side randomly, generically. So whatever you see, it's made up by us. Okay, so let's say I'm running child count and I load data into the staging environment and I want to copy that out because I want to keep, I want to know what my original set of data was for whatever reason. And again, you can leverage these in any way that you see fit, but we wanted to show you the utility and kind of how it works. So all you have to do is execute that from SQL, so from SSMS. Currently, there isn't a way to run this from the UI, but we're looking at incorporating more of the utilities into the UI. But that takes more work trying to get it into the web. We can create a SQL utility pretty quick. So we usually try to create the SQL version first so that it's out there for you to leverage. and then we work on trying to get those things into the UI. So for now, you would have to run this in SQL, but you basically just execute the stored procedure. So, sorry. It would help if I actually ran it instead of deleting it. It takes a couple minutes. And again, the only two parameters required are the school year and then the actual report, the file specification that you're running. It currently only takes a file specification. So like if you're running discipline, you can put in any of the 6 discipline numbers and you'll get all the discipline tables, right? Or you can put in 002 or 089 and you're going to get all of the child count tables. Okay, so you can see it runs pretty quick. I think it was like 7 seconds. So to give you an idea, what it's going to do is staging is the standard generate environment. We created 2 or 3 versions ago. I honestly can't remember. We created the source schema because there are some things that we wanted to be able to create for states to be able to leverage that we don't want to be sort of in the standard generate package. That way, if we're doing updates, if we have to do anything, we're not touching. There's sort of a schema out there that doesn't get touched, and you can leverage that in different ways. So we're using that source schema in this utility to put the copies of those tables. So to show you just the quick larger one, you can see now both of those tables in staging and source have the same number of records. We'll do it a little differently. So if I do top 10, this is going to be the difference between the actual staging table and then the source version of that table is the first 3 columns. So these 3 columns. You're going to have the report that created that snapshot, the year, and then the actual date that it was created. So you can actually go back and review this later and depending on what you want to do. But so you can see, and again, this is test data. I don't want anybody to be concerned that we're showing actual student data. So you can see it's just a copy of the staging environment. All of the data gets copied over and you have it. So then as you are doing other things with the staging environment, whatever you have that original copy. And again, you can leverage this in any way you want, any way you see that it might benefit you. And we're actually looking at some enhancements to this tool as well. So let's say I start to work on another file and I want to create copies of that one. I can do the same thing, just change the report number. So I change it to exiting. Oh, I don't think I created a query for that one. And now you'll see you have both in the table. It does not create a whole new version of the table. So when it's going to copy, like in this case, K-12 enrollment, it just keeps, if that table has already been created in the source environment, it just adds the new report that needs to add records to it. It just adds to that current table with the snapshot report code. So if you ever wanted to go back and look and say, well, I want to see my C002 snapshot, you would just query this table with the snapshot report code criteria. And then you can look at those. The other thing I wanted to point out is if you, like if I was to run this again, obviously it's going to produce the exact same thing because I have the same data. I haven't changed anything in my data. But if I was going to run that again, it looks at the table, and if that data already exists, it overwrites it. So it will remove all the previous records and then create a new one. So currently, it can store one version of each. So you can basically replace it if you want to. We're looking at modifying this tool depending on, your feedback as you're using it. As we're looking at it internally to see like value, how can we leverage this thing? So I just wanted to make you aware of the utility. It's out there. It's very easy to run. And then really quickly, you saw the query, but sorry, let me refresh, make sure. So if I expand the tables in my generate database, I apologize because I have to scroll past all of that. I've got lots of stuff in my test area. And then get past the RDS, eventually, you'll have the source tables. So you'll only see those if you have run this utility, because the standard generate is going to go from the RDS to staging. But if you've run the utility and you've copied out tables, they're there. And then we're also working on a utility to kind of go along with this that'll help you clean this up in the future as well. So you won't have to manually clean it up, as this thing could obviously grow as you start adding more and more to it if you're using it in that way. I think that was it. So Travis, if you would mind taking the share back. Okay. And then the next slide is the other general changes. So really quickly, I'm just going to go through these so you're aware of some of the things that we did in this release. So we have some states that from their generate server, they don't actually have internet access. So the auto upgrade feature didn't work, because part of that process is to actually go out to our production, the generate production server, and pull the update down. So for states that didn't have internet access, they couldn't use the auto update feature. We expanded that ability. There's 2 manual steps. Basically, we would give you the file, you put it in a specific location, and then you can actually run the, and Angie, I see you've added one. I'm going to take that. I can't stop and look at it at the moment, but yes. So for states that don't have internet access, basically you would request the update file. We'll give it to you with instructions to put it in a specific location, and then the auto upgrade will work from that point on. You can, do the auto upgrade. The SPPAPR reports, I can't rush through that one. We just worked on verifying that those are working like we expected, because we've had those in there for a while. And with the major update from 5.3 to 11, we wanted to make sure those were still functional. We updated the metadata for all the data population summary reports, and we're working on verifying all of those, which will be in version 12. The updated Node.js. Node.js is another one of those the packages that we have that's part of the web code that we leverage with the web code. But we run periodic security scans, and it scans all of the generate application, all the child dependencies, and it identifies anything that is either out of date or is a security risk based on versioning, things like that. So we updated Node.js because it was identified in a security scan that it needed to be updated to the newest version. Another thing in the staging tables, with the previous migration process that used to go through the IDS, we had columns in the staging tables that held the IDS IDs. So there, depending on the table, there were multiple of those. Now that we're no longer using the IDS migration, we removed all of those. So now the staging tables are cleaner. You don't have all of those deprecated fields in there any longer. Oh, and then the data migration log is what I described in the other one. Sorry, I didn't realize it was in here as well. But then one other thing too is we also changed the text. So if you're familiar with the way the data migration log used to present, it now presents like with a step number. So it'll stay like step 1 of 6 with the thing that's being run. So the message is slightly different, hopefully a little more informative. And then also, like I said, we cleaned the presentation up on the UI. I think that's it for the general changes. So documentation, I referenced this earlier, and I would highly recommend going out and taking a look at the generate documentation. It's hosted on Gitbook. The link is there. And then specifically over there on the left, we've got the release notes are there. So you can look at the release notes for 11.3, and previous release notes are in there as well. But this has like the bullets of kind of the higher level things that were part of this release. But I would highly recommend going out and looking, at what we have out there, because there's a lot of useful information, and we're trying to add to that, clean that up, make it more useful with every release. So hopefully that will be really useful to you. And I think I kind of like it. On each of the pages, there's a little rating thing that you can click on. And it's really like there's a smiley face, a neutral face, and a frowning face. It's really simple. But those things are helpful as well because if a page is useful to you, that's good to know. If there's one that maybe isn't as useful, that's good for us to know as well. But I would definitely go out and check out the documentation. I think that's it. So the preview of 12, really quickly. Obviously, we'll be making all of the changes that are required for the July files. And then working on a single screen migration. I don't know if we'll be able to get all of that complete. I'm hoping we will, but it's, fairly quick turnaround. But basically, if you're familiar with Generate Now, there's 3 screens, right? So you go to the first screen to migrate your data into the staging environment. Then you come back to the second screen, you migrate into the RDS. Third screen, migrate into reports. We're going to hone that down to a single screen that'll let you work through those same 3 steps, but without having to navigate back and forth to those 3 screens. So that's the single screen migration. Tool enhancements, we're always working on those ways to make those more useful. Like I think Angie just provided us with an enhancement for the Snapshot Utility. So we take all of that stuff in and we try to either come up with new tools if there's something that a state could really benefit from that we don't have, or clean up the ones we already have. Staging validation, I put a plug-in for this in every single release, and I probably will until I am no longer doing this. We have staging validations that you can run at the beginning, at the beginning of the process, like once you've loaded your staging data, you can run staging validations for a specific report. And we have basic rules in there that will just do it does common sense checks, but then it also does real checks. So it can check to say, did this table even get loaded with data? That's a very simple check. But then say, for instance, for a special education student, depending you're working on child count or you're working on exiting or discipline. If you loaded a student and you identified them as being special education, but then there's no primary disability type loaded for that student, right? That would be a problem downstream when it goes to report that student. So there's checks like that as well that will say, okay, you mark them as special education, but there's no disability type, and it will show you the list of students. There's a query that comes with it that will actually show you the students that failed that specific validation. Most of them are warnings in that they won't stop the data from migrating, but we know that that will impact the numbers when you're actually doing matching and you're looking at things at the end in the report. And so every release, we're adding more rules. We're trying to add rules for more files. So we'll be working on that for version 12 as well. And then I mentioned that Wijmo third-party tool. The Wijmo also has some things in the toggle screen, some of the date selectors, things like that. So we'll be working on removing more of that Wijmo dependency. So that's part of what we'll be working on in 12 as well. I think that's all I have for the preview of 12. So now it's open for questions. Oh, sorry, release calendar. I think, Liz, were you going to talk about the release calendar?
Yeah, I'm going to briefly talk about it, and we can jump into questions. So I think most of you have seen this, but this is our newest and updated release calendar for Generate. So on the left-hand side of the screen are the actual, when we're targeting, releasing the specific version. So you can see there version 12 was scheduled for February. Version 11.3 was scheduled for February. 12 will be in May. And then you can see on the right-hand side of the screen the associated files for each of those releases. So which file specifications those releases will be targeting. Again, this is, we're trying to get things out as soon as possible. So once those EdPass, the dates open within EdPass, we're trying to get the releases out to you in the corresponding time. So even just prior to the submission, prior to when the submission due date is, when it's just opening up in EdPass, we're trying to get them out to you a little bit previous to that. So any questions or comments about this? Okay. And then just wanted to open it up to you all if you had any specific items you wanted to discuss, if you had any questions about anything that Johnny has spent the last 30 or so minutes reviewing. Okay, I'm not hearing anything. We can continue through the slides, Travis, and then if anything pops up, if you are have questions or you're actually doing the update and have any questions or concerns, you can always reach out to us and let us know as well. So this is the evaluation that I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation. This, again, it's a 2-minute evaluation. If you could spend, a few seconds doing so, it's really helpful. We do use the information to try and kind of change up these office hours or try and, make them as best as possible for you all. So again, it's really important, and we really do take the information back and try and incorporate it in. Dan or someone just put the link for that inside the chat. Yes, they just did that, Angie. Yep, I think that's it.
And I think Travis just put in the chat, if you didn't see it, that everybody is unmuted. So if you do have a question or something that you want to ask, you can take yourself off mute. And I will dodge those questions as best I can.
Folks, if you haven't also seen it, in the chat are a few helpful links to some of the documents and documentation that we referred to today. And that clickable link is still on the bottom of that chat. So if you have to access it, there it is.
Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Okay, thank you all so much. And like I said, don't hesitate to reach out if you do have questions coming out of this call. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.